All right, here we go. Pancreation Philosophy, episode 151. I'm your host, Pocho Cruz, and with me today is who are you, guess?
Hi, my name is Owen Lyons Smith. I'm a comic, sort of loosely based out of
Sort of
Salem,
loosely.
Washington. Yeah, all around
Yeah,
Pacific Northwest.
Pacific Northwest. Okay. And and so how did you get started in comedy?
Oh man, that's a good question. I got started like doing stand up and stuff down in Salem. I was looking for a place to do comedy, and I wandered past this place called the Capital City Theater,
Okay,
which is now rebranding into the Infinity Room, which isn't that
into the
important. Basically,
Infinity Room.
yeah, they had a sign outside that was like, capitalcitytheater.com, come to our
Mhm.
website, and I went there and I was like, oh, there's open mics, there's comedy shows. So I just got up and I started doing open mics, and they had a really like supportive community, and that kind of brought me in. I mean, so that's how I started doing it like more, I think like in clubs and stuff. Although our high school had like a community center,
Okay,
they ran this one show I think called Laugh On, where
laugh on.
they invited a bunch of random high schoolers to make stand-up sets. And I was one of the people that they asked to do it.
Yes.
So I think one of the people that worked at the community center knew me, and they were like, "Oh, you should do it! Like, you should stand up." And they asked me if I would do it, and I was like, "Well, I guess I'll do it." And so and so that was I ended up doing that. And I mean, most of the high schoolers were not very good, and I wasn't. I was one of them. I was not very
Mhm.
good.
Mhm.
I think there were one or two that told some like really funny stories. But I like tried to write like proper jokes. It was the first time I'd ever done it really bad. But after I'd done it that one time, I thought it was really fun, and so I was just like, "Fuck yeah, I want to do this." Looked for that place in Salem and managed to find it. So that was
Nice.
kind of how I got started.
Okay. So I guess like before doing stand up on your own, like what stand up comedy did you already like discover, or what did you like watch any, consume any beforehand? Yeah.
Yeah. Let me think. So I guess I would say like probably my first like foray into stand up was
Mhm.
I watched when I was younger. So both my parents are British,
Okay.
and I actually watched a lot of like British TV.
Okay.
I just kind of went off and found it, and so I had actually seen a lot of like British comedy.
Mhm.
And then once I got a little bit older, maybe some like Netflix specials, things like that. I think most people my age were kind of growing up watching people like Louis C.K. or Dave Chappelle.
Mhm.
And then obviously like from my parents, I was watching a bunch of British comics, people like Jimmy Carr and
Mhm.
Frankie Boyle, and a lot of comedians from that. So I kind of like, I liked comedy a lot, and I really enjoyed doing it. I didn't really think about it as like, oh, that's something I could do. I just thought like telling jokes is really fun, and I love these stand-up comedians.
Mhm.
And I think especially like it had that interesting connection too, where I was watching lots of British comedy, and because my parents were British, I think I felt like a connection there where I was like,
Mhm.
my parents love to laugh, and I can see like this kind of British culture thing is to laugh, and so I'm just enjoying laughing, and it felt kind of like a thing, just a thing to do, you know?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess once you started like, doing, or like you were saying, like attempting to write, did that, like, what changed? Did it anything change in how you viewed comedy, or how you viewed like watching stand up like afterwards, like from there? Yeah.
That's a good question. Um, Man, I think it did. For sure. I
Hmm.
mean, for sure it did. I guess it depends on like how, like, because I
Hmm.
think there were some good the way that I saw it afterwards, but there were also some things that were not so good.
Okay.
Like in terms of good stuff, I think I got more of an appreciation for comedy that I didn't necessarily have before. Like I think there is an extra level to comedy that when I watch it now, where I'm like, not only was that really funny, but like that was just a well like written joke, or like that was just well made, or you can see like people that are really good performers, and you just kind of like that.
Hmm.
And watching my peers perform as well, even at like open mics and stuff, where maybe it's not like the best crowd. watching my peers perform and do jokes, I could like appreciate like, oh, I know these things about them, like they're my friends. I know this about them and now they're telling this joke. And you get kind of an extra level to it. Like once you start writing and talking to other people that are writing. And then in terms of like the bad side of it, I sometimes worry that there's like a little bit of snobbery too, where like, there are times that I like can't help my brain from thinking in like just a casual conversation with friends where they've said something intended as a joke, and I kind of subconsciously go like, I wonder how they could have like punched up that joke, or I wonder if they could have like done this to make it funnier. And it's like,
Yeah.
mate, it's like a barbecue. You don't have to fucking, no one's here delivering their type five. It's just a place to hang out, and so,
Poor delivery there, Brad. You could have
like, come on, man. Or like better character work. I couldn't even tell you. Like, it's so stupid.
Were you even trying? I just don't believe
man?
you.
Yeah, I don't know. Have you ever caught yourself doing that? I do that sometimes. I don't know.
No, I definitely catch myself like doing that all the time. Like just hearing like other people talk, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like I've heard this story before, and it still sounds the same. You really gotta change.
Yeah.
They're like poor delivery here. It's like,
yeah, for sure.
Like,
yeah.
Oh, you're building it up for that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Did it sound better in your head?
Oh yeah, I'm generally good enough to not let that thought escape, like to not say it, but I catch myself thinking that, and sometimes I'm like, God damn, like I wish I didn't have that, but I think it comes partly from writing and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I guess in terms of like the writing process or like that kind of creative process, like how did that develop for you? Because as you said, you started attempting to write jokes. I mean, attempt the key word there. So how did the writing process like develop, like from when you started out?
Yeah. Man, I think I started writing jokes like when I first did it, like the very first time that I did stand up in high school. I kind of just was like, what are some silly thoughts that I've had, and I would like kind of just write those down.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was really silly stuff. When I look back on it, it's like it's a lot of it's also really crude too. Like I think I had a bit like one of the first bits that I did when I like was in Salem. I had to do with like, oh man, the worst. I think this was pretty much the joke. It was like, oh man, the worst thing about being a necrophiliac would be meeting the parents. Like just shit like that.
Yeah.
Was like what I was writing down. Yeah. And it was like get some laughs for sure. And I think I was like I was kind of a teenager sort of phase where I was like, I'm fucking clever writing jokes. and then I started reading some like books about like joke writing and stuff like that. And that really helped my actual, like my process of like sort of crystallizing, like this is a silly thought, but like, what can I do to make it into like a joke that will get people to laugh maybe more than once? Because I think if you just sort of say things where you're like, this is a silly thought I had once, it's a little more like part of the laugh is maybe it's a bit more of like the shocking kind of thing. And I was like, how can I write jokes that are going to be like consistently funny, or just things where like, how do I actually mine stuff for like better jokes? Because I've seen, comedians perform really great jokes. How do I kind of write something like that? And so reading books was the main way that I like learned how to do that. And I think that shaped a lot of my writing process. And then like once I had started reading, it became a lot easier to continue just like writing and improving upon like what I had done. Because you get so much feedback when you're doing stand-up. So like I would read the book and I would go, okay, I'm going to write some jokes that are in like this format, or I'm going to write this style of jokes. And then I'd go try it one night, and you get the feedback if people laugh or they don't. And then you kind of know like, okay, here's maybe something I could change. And a lot of that sometimes is just like intuition of, they didn't laugh at this, like why didn't they laugh? Maybe you kind of get a sense from your performance. Maybe you have like audience members that are like friends or people you've brought, and you can ask them and they'll be like, I think this wasn't funny because of X, Y, and Z, or the way you delivered it seemed like sad instead of funny. And you're like, okay, I'll figure that stuff. So I think my writing process is like, started out as just kind of stream of consciousness, and then slowly developed thanks to like reading and just practicing. Yeah, it's the best way to get better, right?
Okay. So I guess when you started reading, like, what were some key takeaways or some, I guess, important points that made you like reconsider, or I guess like
Mhm.
was like a catalyst for change for your writing process?
Yeah, yeah. I think so. I didn't. It's such a simple thing, but I hadn't really thought about it before. Which, man, this is gonna sound really stupid. You're gonna laugh. I already know. I hadn't really thought about when I was making the jokes before that like there has to be a setup and a punchline.
Mhm.
Like you, if you're telling a joke, sometimes when you're just saying a funny thing you thought, it feels like it's a funny thing, like it's some unit of like funniness.
Mhm.
But then once you realize it's like writing a setup and a punchline, you're like, okay, the setup is like the information they need for the punchline to be funny. And I think that like very simple thing of just reminding myself kind of like opened it up in my head where I was like, everything that I'm saying up here has to be like getting to this. And then I found I wasn't saying as much like unnecessary stuff, or it like helped me to trim that down. And I found that, I could understand like people aren't laughing. They're not laughing at the punch, like some combination of the punchline and the setup. Maybe the setup's too wordy. Maybe the punch not funny. Like I understand like these are the two kind of basic like units, and not every joke is like looks the same, but there's kind of that element of like there you need to know what's going to make the joke funny in the end, what's going to be the thing that actually like makes people laugh. And so that was one thing that like the book that I read initially kind of said. It was like, okay, you're writing jokes. When you write your setup, like you can write it out and then like underline what you want the punchline to be. And then when you go test it out, if that's not where they laugh, figure out why, like work on that. And so just that really simple thing helped a lot. But it does feel kind of silly to say out loud because it's just like jokes are a setup and a punchline. And you're like, fucking yeah, obviously,
Mhm.
but it really did help, yeah. So I think that
Nice.
was a big thing.
No, I think that's important. I think sometimes it's, especially I think when people are beginning, they tend to almost like overcomplicate things. I
Yeah.
think it's just kind of how it goes. You're like, well, everything's new, so I guess I gotta just learn everything.
Hmm.
Whereas instead of like compartmentalizing it, like when
Yeah.
almost like you almost have to be so in deep when you realize, oh, if I just take a step back, I'm kind of looking at this not like the incorrect way, but it's focusing
Mhm.
on a tree and getting lost in the forest, that kind of way.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think that's one big thing that too is really fun about comedy and about like performing it is it's like very simple
Mhm.
in a lot of ways because you have like basic sort of setup punchline stuff, but also like lots of jokes are about stuff that happened or stuff that you like thought
Mhm.
and just kind of like wrote down, or things you laughed about with like friends and then now you're like saying it on stage, and like it's not easy necessarily to get like huge laughs like the stuff that proper stand-up comedians do isn't like, or sorry, like wildly successful stand-up comedians do isn't like fucking, it's not easy, but the
Yes.
basics are actually like pretty simple.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I think that does happen a lot too when I'm writing a joke and I'm like, oh, I'm just not getting it, is like reminding myself of like some basic stuff. I'm like, okay, that helped a little bit to make it look like this, instead of like you said, getting lost in the, yeah, losing the forest in the trees sort of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you go, as you're doing, so you did the high school open mic, and then what happened afterwards, like from there, like.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think from then I kind of wasn't doing
Mhm.
comedy for a little bit, and this is kind of happened too because I've been doing like school as well.
Mhm.
Pretty much what I was told is like you gotta, once I started college, they were like you have to finish. So I did, and I'm
Yeah.
about to be done. And
Okay.
so what happened basically is I would kind of take like breaks dependent on like either if it was like winter breaks or things like that was happening. So I took a break because I had started school, and I wanted to find a place that I could perform.
Mhm.
But I was like, we'll put that on the back burner. I'm still getting used to this whole college thing. And once I found that theater, I started doing some of the open mics there. And then they also had improv shows that they would do. And so I auditioned to be like on their improv team and got accepted for that as well. And so I sort of hit a point, I would say around like maybe start of my sophomore year, basically, where my kind of process or my, yeah, like what I would do during the week was basically for like up until Thursday, maybe I would be like doing schoolwork. And then Thursday was the open mic night. And then I would usually do like one improv show on either Friday or Saturday that we would do. And I would just go on and do those. And it hit a point. I think this is what was such a bummer is like it hit a point right actually before the COVID-19 pandemic where I was like throughout the week chilling in my room from like Wednesday onwards. I was basically just living at the theater, like doing shows, which was super fun. I was really stoked about it. And like it was just great. The theater was like a great environment to do that. And I would get to do like stand-up shows in like places around Oregon too. And then that kind of just like just came right to a halt, right with COVID. But so the process was like a lot better than I expected. I think I got really lucky to find a place that was like really welcoming me, like, and wanted me to do comedy there. That was kind of my process too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in terms of, you kind of already touched upon it, but like, talking about writing and how your writing has developed like from there. So how would you say, like, how would you say that your comedy, I wouldn't say like necessarily changed, but how has it like, shifted like throughout, like, or has it gone through like any stages like from there? Yeah.
I would say it definitely has. Like, I think, I think like what I've found in my personal writing is that, oftentimes like after I've like taken a break for a while, I usually come back with just like a bunch of ideas and I'm able to like find something that's really fun, and just like sparks kind of that creativity again. So when I first started out, I was doing kind of a bunch of jokes, something, who really knows what's going on. And then I took a break.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh shit, I'm skinny. I should do that. I'll do that.
Yeah.
And I told a bunch of jokes. I was like,
That's it.
I'm a skinny fuck. I'm the Eiffel Tower. Let's do it. I'm very skinny.
Yeah.
And I took a little break after that. And I hit upon doing jokes about like accents. So what I was doing a lot of jokes about like my parents' accents and all this other stuff. So I've always loved doing accents. And I was like, fuck, this is great. Like, accents are weird and people's accents are funny, and so it was a lot of fun to do stuff like that as well. And so now more recently, like after the break, I've been coming back to it and trying to write more jokes about like relationships and things like that. And so that's what I find is like the cycle for me is like what I want to write about at any given moment, and I go through cycles like that. Where my writing changes to be like, let's, write about this topic or try about this. And I think what's nice about that too is there's still so much left that I haven't written about. So I feel like there's a lot of, stuff out there that I can still write about. Yeah. And then in terms of like actual style of like performing comedy, I think I became a lot less, I don't know, I think I got a lot less pretentious in terms of like how I performed. This is kind of jumping back to something mentioned before, but one thing that I was reading in the book was partly about like delivery and how you talk to the audience, because it was talking about like roast jokes and stuff like that. Like if you're making a joke to like an audience member or something like that, then it's like, how are you going to make a joke that's going to like insult the audience member, but not actually like lose their trust in like this act is all in good faith and you are just kind of joking and having fun. And part of it talked about like, when you're referring to like audience members or to like groups of people, like you have to think about how you're phrasing these jokes, because if you say something where you're like, oh man, people that do X, Y, and Z all suck, it's like there's risk in that, because people will go up and they'll say jokes where they're like, man, people that go to comedy clubs fucking suck, and it's like, if you say that, you're insulting the entire audience. They're probably not going to be down for that. And so when I first started out, it's not like I was doing a bunch of that, but I think I had this vision of like, I'm performing and the audience doesn't say anything and there's like this barrier, and then I made all these kind of rules in my head, but it's a performance that you're doing with the audience. And so I think I learned kind of a lot just from reading, where I was like, man, I feel like sometimes when people weren't laughing at my jokes, they probably were thinking, this guy's kind of pretentious, or he's telling these jokes and he thinks he's so clever, but he's not, all that. So I think I felt like, okay, well, I'm telling these jokes in order to like entertain people. And so there's a relationship that I have to build up there. And so my style, I think, became a little different, where I felt like I was talking to the audience as opposed to like at them, I think. If that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. It's more of a collaborative kind of thing. It's like a give and take, like from that,
Yeah.
rather than like, all right, here's the funny, find it funny.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you've ever been to a performance too, where it feels like, where I think as an audience member too, because I do like watching comedy a lot. It's like you feel like you're being held hostage by the performer. Nobody likes that. I'm trying to think of the most recent time that happened. I think it was on a show I was doing, and the person who was performing got like cross-faded for their performance. And they weren't even like telling coherent jokes anymore as they were performing. And as an audience member, you're like, I mean, this is crap, and it feels like you didn't put in the effort to like be funny to me. And that's, it just feels like not great, from an audience perspective. And, I think people get frustrated at that sort of thing. So, you don't want to hold the audience hostage by just like not really, by not caring about them. They're out to have a good time and like, at night. So got to give them something, right?
Okay. So I guess, you mentioned your parents both being British. Do you feel like that kind of humor has like fallen like onto you, or has influenced you at all, like from that?
Definitely, yeah. My parents' humor has definitely like influenced me for sure. I do a lot of kind of like embellishing with different jokes of things maybe that my parents have said, but they're both really funny. And like British humor is a lot of sarcasm too, so I like constantly was laughing even when I was like a kid and growing up. And so that definitely feels like it fell down to me. And I think that like there's some good like stories about it. One of my favorite jokes to tell is a story about my mom, which is and I like this joke, I think probably the most because it's like completely true. I really haven't like picked up any of the facts about it. Which is that is a story is I was basically packing for a trip to visit my ex in California, and I was packing a box of condoms, and I'm putting the box away, and my mom walks in and sees me putting the box away, and she like turns around and walks out of the room and goes, "Didn't mean to find your lifetime supply there, buddy," right? And I just fucking like it was just such a funny and like genuine moment. And then I asked her afterwards about it, and I was like, I can't believe you said that after you saw the condoms. And she was like, I didn't see the condoms. Like, I actually had no idea you had condoms. I was just saying that as like a joke, as if you had condoms. Did you actually have condoms? And I was like, yes, I fucking had condoms. Like, what are you talking? Like, you just made that shit up? And she's like, I don't know. I was glad you're being safe, I guess. I was like, what the fuck, mom? Like, what? So, that story is, I really love that story, and that's just like one example of like their kind of sense of humor. And I think that definitely influenced me when like stuff like that would happen, for sure. Yeah.
So I guess like nowadays, I mean, you're still like probably reading, of course, like on comedy, but I guess like what's your latest way of I guess consuming comedy or finding out new ways to like explore comedy from there?
Yeah. I think latest ways of consuming comedy, man. I mean, here's the kick that I've been on recently. This is sort of a question in response to your question that I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on. Like, my thing with comedy recently that I've been thinking about is like is kind of like political humor. But I've been thinking about it like this because as we know, with like the kind of most recent election that's happened, and I mean throughout all of like the most recent presidency, like I've been like reading the news and shit like that, and I studied politics at university, and so I've always been like thinking about it. But when I think about like writing jokes about it, I kind of like come up against a wall because I kind of worry I guess not worry. Like the way that I see it is like one half of, or maybe a little bit less of our country believes like one thing and the other half believes a different thing. Like two completely opposite versions of reality.
Mhm.
So if you were to make a joke where you're like, aha, this guy's an idiot, half the audience will be like, no, that's not true. And they won't laugh at like whatever it is you've written. And so part of like what I've been doing with comedy recently is just kind of thinking about like this problem and like how do you kind of reconcile and like what will comedy look like once we're basically like once we've kind of moved on from like this election, like will it ever like look the same? Will it be the case that like political jokes are only enjoyed by like one half of the audience, not the other half? Like I think I've been watching like SNL too, and John Mulaney did a monologue. I think where I mean, he made a bunch of jokes, kind of making fun of Trump, right? And like I think it's funny, but I'm certain that there are people that watch SNL that are watching this and they're like fucking rah, and they're really mad about it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, like that's kind of been my most recent thing is I don't know what to think about whether or not like there's a way to tell like political jokes that aren't going to alienate like half the audience. Um, I don't know. Do you have thoughts about this or?
Yeah, I think in politics, just like any kind of topic, I feel like I can see your point on how it seems like, especially nowadays, the political climate is like real divided.
Yeah.
But I still feel that there has to be some way to still
Mm-hmm.
get laughter. I mean, it's hard to get laughter from like from everybody, but this I
Mm-hmm.
still get like from a majority, no matter like what their political outlooks are. Like from there, I think
Yeah.
there's still a way to do it. If anything, the challenging political climate might make that kind of a quest to find like good political humor, better in that kind of regards, because then you have to like walk like a finer line, or like trying to explore like that kind of line, like from
Yeah.
there.
You
Yeah,
have to talk about it more and that
mhm,
maybe produces more
yeah.
like honest sort of comedy.
And I guess like understanding perspective, I think is good too, because then seeing like getting a broader sense of like of the picture would help you figure out like, okay, where there's humor that lies on both sides here, like where is it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think like uh that's a good way of thinking about it. I honestly I'm just curious because
Yeah.
I love hearing what other people think about stuff. But
Hmm.
it's interesting to hear you say like because there's so much kind of division and all these things going on, there might be more opportunities for comedy.
Yeah.
Um, as opposed to less because people are talking about it so frequently, which is kind of interesting because I guess you've got to find those ways to use comedy to kind of connect to people,
Hmm.
and so you'll end up with better stuff. That's
No,
a very
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, that's a very positive spin on it. I really like that.
No, because the way, especially the way I look at it, especially with comedy in terms of like jokes or like ideas that end up persisting throughout history, it's because it was something. It's not really playing it safe. They took like a topic somehow, some way, and they're able to spin like funny into it. Rather, it's almost like the more risk, the more reward. It kind of
Mhm.
goes like from there.
Yeah.
So that,
and
that
and I,
that's yeah.
yeah, and I don't think it's totally hopeless. I mean, I was at a show recently in Dallas, Oregon, where
Okay.
just like because just so you know about Dallas, Oregon, and what it's
Yes.
like, as we were
What it's
driving
like.
into Dallas, Oregon,
Yeah.
we passed 70 bars and 500 churches.
Okay.
So this is like the south of Oregon,
Okay.
basically. And so we're driving there, and one of the comics got up and did a joke about how she was at a BLM rally.
Hmm. Hmm.
And somebody in the front row was wearing a sort of a bandana that had like a Blue Lives Matter flag on it
Hmm.
as she's
Hmm.
telling this joke. And it didn't bomb. It didn't go great, but it didn't like super bomb.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so I think in some cases, there's ways to be like maybe you recognize, stuff that's funny anyways, or, people laughing kind of across the aisle. It's not totally hopeless, I guess. Yeah. Oh, that's good. And then I think the other thing too that I've been doing recently to keep myself engaged in comedy is like continuing to work on old material too that I have, like the jokes that I have about like doing accents. I still really love like learning and reading about like accents, and so I've been just tearing through like YouTube videos about different like dialects and accents and stuff like that. And I've been really working on one particular bit
Okay.
about Jamaican accent,
Okay.
because of a like a story that I have like from my past. So I really like, I want to get that like the accent right and learn about it so I can talk about it. I guess I should say, like, generally when I do the bit about accents, I also like explain some of like the history of the accents too, and like kind of the funny ways that like those accents come about. And so I want to make sure that I like get that bit right if I were to talk about it. But I think initially the joke is kind of based on the fact that I met a really skinny, elderly Jamaican man, and he was a like camp counselor at a camp that I was at, and he like gave me some advice, or I think he just was like joking around with me about like being skinny also. And so he said some shit to me when I was younger where he was like, if you're going to be only made of bones, don't you want them things to be stronger? Like something like that. It's just like playing around with me.
Yeah.
And he taught me a little bit about like Jamaican language and stuff like that. And so that's another way that I've been like doing comedy recently, is just learning as much as I can about accents so that I can like work on these jokes. It's fun stuff.
Okay. I guess on that note, like, like what about accents do you find like funny in that kind of regards? It was like, what's the like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me with accents, like what I like about them is that they tell a lot of the story about like cultures, and you can learn a lot about like the history of different cultures like through their accents, which I think is really fun, because I think people are just a really fertile area for like jokes and comedy. And so with my parents being from England, but I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and then this has been my accent for my entire life. I've always been kind of like fascinated by the idea of like everybody else around me talks like differently. How did
Yeah.
that happen?
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot how to do a British accent like from my parents.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of kept going from there and like researching about different accents. And it was crazy to learn like how much could kind of be deferred from one culture to another, like through accents. So like one thing that I think is kind of funny is like when you look at Scotland, there's like two kind of really distinctive accents in Scotland. There's the Edinburgh accent and the Glaswegian accent. And like just culturally, the two cities, like Edinburgh is a more kind of like, we've got all these like art exhibitions, and everyone can come on down, and we're still Scotland, but like it's Edinburgh, it's fine. Whereas Glasgow is definitely regarded as a lot like crustier on the outside, which is like not Scottish, get the fuck out, like kind of a thing, right? So and that like sort of comes from like the history of the accents too. So England was responsible for this because they're fucking responsible for everything in the British Isles. Everything bad that happens starts with like, so England, let's start with them. So England, they decided at one point, one of their kings had like conquered a little bit of Scotland, and he went, we're going to make all of the Scottish people drop their like the R, like the rolled R, where they'd be like, that sort of thing. They were like, we're going to make them all drop that because we don't have that in England, so they shouldn't have it here either. And the people in Edinburgh were sort of like, okay, you could probably kill us, so it's whatever. Like we'll drop it a little bit, but we're still Scotland, so fuck you. Whereas Glasgow was like, fucking no way that's happening. Like, you're not getting rid of our R, right? And then that like culturally just kind of extended out to the rest of like Glasgow. And so it's always had that reputation of a city that's just like tougher on the outside pretty much because they were the half of Scotland that, said up yours to the British, right? So that's just where it comes from. And so when I start reading about this stuff, so much of it is funny. and to, you know, to listen to how like people talk and the way that it influences like the things they say. There's lots of colloquial phrases that are just funny. The different accents have, you know. I think "in it" as like a British phrase is great, or like different dialects have different words they say. Like I was talking about this on a different podcast I was doing, which is the British word or like colloquialism they use of minted, which is just when you're so completely like drunk or high that you like don't even have a concept of what's real anymore. You just say like, oh my god, that person's fucking minted. You see that? He's had, you know, like 6 shots tonight, something like that, right? And so I don't know, learning about that stuff it's always fascinated me because of my parents, and just reading about it's like super funny. I think that's what gets me about it. So yeah, that's where it comes from.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We can. Oh yeah. Yeah, we can start wrapping up. Any I guess any last word or anything that you're working on like right now that you'd like the viewers or listeners to like check out?
Sure. Yeah. There's another podcast that I'm gonna be on soon-ish. It's called
Soonish.
the
Okay.
Soon-ish. Yeah, it's on the 14th. I'm gonna be on something called the Pod Chaos. It's
The
by
podcast.
yeah, it's by some other Salem comics, Zach Chappell, Chad Johnson, and Emma Pace Jonas, and they're making a special Hanukkah edition of their podcast.
Okay.
I'm gonna be on it for one episode with my tiny amount of Jewish heritage. They've allowed me to be on the show.
With your tiny
Uh,
amount.
yeah,
Just
so
a little bit. I have one
just
dreidel. Here we go.
my mother, her mother was Jewish, and so the Torah says they've got me. So I'm Jewish, and I'm going to be on that show. It's really fun. It's a fun podcast. I always like when I get to do it. Yeah, and those are just a couple of cool cats from Salem that I'll be doing that with. I don't have any online comedy shows that I'm going to be doing, but you know, I'm sure I'll be on some soon. So if you want to follow along for updates about any of that stuff, my Twitter also is at OLS Comedy. So I'll post updates there if you're interested.
Cool. All right. That's been Owen Lyons Smith, everyone. All right. Thanks again for your time, Owen.
Yeah, it's great being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.